Hello, everybody, and welcome to the joint webinar from Centric and Acumina today, 2020 Employee Experience, Building a Strategy, Amplifying Culture, and Embracing Technology. We are going to give people about 5 minutes to get into the session, so we'll start at about 5 past the hour, and so just stay tuned, and we'll kick things off shortly. Thank you. Hi, for anybody that's joined in the last couple of minutes, we are going to give people till 5 past the hour to make sure everybody can get in, and then we'll get kicked off. Thank you. All right, it's 5 past the hour, so we'll get started. Again, I want to welcome everybody to this joint webinar with Acumina and Centric Consulting, the 2020 Employee Experience, Building a Strategy, Amplifying Culture, and Embracing Technology. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get things kicked off. So just some housekeeping items to start. You can ask questions at any time in the GoToWebinar panel. We will hold off on answering questions until the end of the session so that we can get through all of the content, but we have made time at the end to answer questions. If you are apt to, please follow Acumatica on LinkedIn at Acumatica. You can also check us out on our website to learn more. And as well, please follow our partner Centric at Centric on Twitter and at Centric Consulting on LinkedIn. From a presentation perspective, my name is Troy Trudell. I'm going to be one of your joint presenters today. I'm the Vice President of Alliances at Acumatica, so I work with a lot of Acumatica's partners as well as our customers as we help them implement employee-centric solutions. And so that's what I'll be focusing on today, is kind of the experience we've seen in the marketplace. And I'll turn it over to Aaron to introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Troy, and welcome everyone. Thanks for making the time to join the webinar today. My name is Aaron Audie. As Troy said, I'm with Centric Consulting. I lead our enterprise collaboration practice nationally and are smack dab in the middle of the modern workplace experience and digital workplace solutions space. So happy to be with Troy today and looking forward to a great presentation today.
Thanks, Aaron. And just by way of introduction of our two organizations, we've only got a couple of slides here to share, but figure it would be important. From our perspective, we are a software vendor. We provide what we have coined, and really some of the analysts in the market have coined, an employee experience platform. And that's just a way of saying that our software helps customers build the right experiences for their employees. And that could be a modern intranet. It could be a digital dashboard solution. It could be a collaboration and social solution that customers are using to work closer together internally. And again, we are squarely on the software side of things, whereas Centric, who's our partner, and Aaron will introduce their practice in a moment, they're really on the implementation and consulting and advisory side of things. So we provide the platform that our joint customers use. We're highly regarded in the industry by both Forrester and Gartner and other analysts in the marketplace.
Thanks, Troy. So from Centric's perspective, we've been in the business a little over 20 years now and are a national firm. We actually started as a virtual company and provide management and technology consulting to clients from Fortune 50 all the way down to organizations just starting up and in the nonprofit, not-for-profit space. Within our organization, we have national practices focused on industry vertical solutions and service offerings. Service offerings are those that are specific to either a technology or business consulting area. And so I represent our modern workplace or enterprise collaboration service offering. We are a managed Microsoft partner. Troy, if you want to go to the next slide there for a minute. We do quite a bit of work with Microsoft over the years. We are also heavily invested in the capabilities that are available in the modern workplace from both Microsoft 365 Teams and security protocols. We have over the years, focused on a number of digital workplace solutions, and in 2016 decided to become a partner with Acumatica, and we feel like that was a very good decision because of the capabilities the product provides, as well the employee interaction and engagement that it can ultimately surface for our clients. So very happy with that partnership over the years.
We are as well. So going to the next slide here, and that was, everything about Acumatica and Centric that we'll make you sit through. Probably have Aaron lead this one, but really we want to start talking about why employee experience matters, and we, I think, all on this call together probably think it matters more today than it has in recent history. So I'll talk a little bit about the stats in a moment, but Aaron, why don't you kind of talk about the experience that you've seen over the last, say, 4 to 6 months in 2020 that your firm has experienced working with customers?
Absolutely, Troy. It is not an understatement to say that this year has introduced dramatic and systemic changes to our clients. I think the biggest And perhaps most notable statistic is just the acceleration and the, in some cases, necessity to accelerate digital strategy, work from anywhere, work from home, the idea that business is really conducted wherever you have a decent internet connection, combined with just thinking and figuring out a way to keep employees engaged. This is a radical transformation for quite a few of our clients. And so how does an organization maintain and then ultimately build a successful employee experience amidst COVID-19? Not an insignificant or non-trivial task. I think we've seen with organizations in academia, we've seen manufacturing organizations, we've seen organizations in finance and healthcare really address this head on. And part of the challenge there has been the technology and the underlying capabilities available to organizations, in some cases, not fully deployed or deployed in part. So ultimately, we're seeing the large organizations like IBM, of course, Microsoft and others, really publish a good deal of information on how to create this borderless work from anywhere workplace. I think what's interesting for us as a company, we'll talk about that in a little bit here, is this is how we've been working for the last 19 years. We have been a virtual company, and so we're actually getting invited to a number of direct engagements with clients just to share what we've done. How do we build and maintain and grow a healthy employee experience amidst a fully virtual, fully remote experience? So certainly something that's acute, we've been part of, and are seeing really radically impact organizations here this year.
Thanks, Aaron. And again, we're going to we'll share these slides after the call, certainly, but just so you don't have to read all the stats here. But not only has employee experience been more relevant now than ever before, if you look at some of the stats on this slide, they aren't just from this year, right? One of them is from 2015 from Forrester, and just then focusing on employee experience was important because it helped with things like reducing absentee days. It helps with reducing things like accidents. It helps with overall growth and profit of organizations. By making sure that you're really focusing on that employee experience, you can see true business upticks. Now, I'd say these numbers are probably exacerbated now, right? Because more people have been forced to go remote than maybe they were planning to, right? And I would even say that as we look at things, we've got customers that are fully transitioning to remote for part of their workplaces. We have customers that have decided that they're hiring, and we've done this at Acumatica, that they're hiring more for the people than where they're located, which wasn't always the case, even in, say, as recent as last year. You're even seeing in the news these days that some organizations are rethinking the way that they work. For example, REI, the big outdoor retailer, they literally had a campus set up to go live this year, their corporate office. They've decided they're actually going to sell that campus and focus most of their corporate employees on remote work and regional offices instead of these large campuses. And so this notion of being able to engage employees through technology and utilizing strategies is even more important today than it ever has been. And kind of on that note, we think that the most important thing to start with is a strategy and thinking about how you would engage employees. Again, whether they're going to come back into the office or are in offices now, or whether they're going to be fully remote or primarily remote. And Aaron, I'll probably have you lead this one, and I can tag in.
Absolutely. And really the question that I think has become fundamental is my organization ready? Are we ready to work really from anywhere? And it's not just the employee experience that is, of course, on people's minds. If we think about this diagram given here, ultimately there is a customer engagement that's changed as well. How do I do my relationship management? How do I deliver my product and service to customers? How does the dynamic of this COVID-19 experience really impact that? And then ultimately, if I think about how to deliver that inside of the organization with my employees' experience, what do I need to do differently? How do I actually need to invest in either the technology or the processes or information for that matter? And things as simple as, VPN. I think when March rolled around, we had a couple of our clients where, VPN may have only been designed for 5 to 7% of their organization, and now they had 60 to 70% of their organization, or they had files that were stored in network drives, and now, they were partially migrated to the cloud. some of these things that are important but may not necessarily make it to the top 10 list of technical investments, they became areas that were absolutely important to address. And I think it's important to note that some of the areas that are part of this strategy to really drive employee experience are not necessarily all technology. For example, the strategy to improve that engagement with customers obviously involves people who know how to work remotely, who know how to leverage perhaps new processes or be flexible in the fact that their processes may change, and then ultimately have the right technology, the right connections to service clients, and actually do things that maybe have in the past been a direct engagement through a face-to-face meeting. One interesting story here is that from a relationship building perspective, we've actually seen a shift from a direct engagement with clients to ways to further build relationship through things like gift baskets, thoughtful and meaningful engagements that directly tie to the relationship, both for the customer and building that relationship with them, as well as the employee. So a strategy is fundamental to understanding, hey, is my organization ready to work from anywhere? And if it's not, what do I need to do and how do I need to tweak it to get ready?
Great, and I'll echo a couple things there. We've certainly seen that as well. We've seen, and I won't mention names for some of these things, certainly have examples at the end of the call, but we've seen people want to accelerate the implementation of even things like employee portals. So working with one professional basketball organization, and they needed to get their new employee portal up and running rapidly, literally as they were packing up their trucks to send all their equipment and their teams down to Orlando. And so we were able to get them up and running in about a week and a half with the new employee portal so they could share information, they could share relevant content across their organization, knowing that while a lot of them were working remote, a lot of them were also now headed down to Florida and needed to have a lifeline of information available for them, but they needed to do it rapidly. And that's something that goes to what Aaron was saying is are you ready to actually work from anywhere? And certainly we can help with those things.
Troy, I think one of the other things we've seen too is when we start to look at the strategy, we've been asked from organizations, how do we do this sort of from the bottom up or sort of upward and outward versus from the top down? The organization may not necessarily be ready as a whole, but there are departments or there are groups, sales, HR, IT, that may need to out of necessity. And so what we've been finding is that there are key stakeholders necessary for really owning and driving the strategy and working out how this will actually be deployed in the organization. We're starting to see more of the CHRO co-ownership or co-lead driving this process. We actually have a client who is really trying to figure out how Teams is used, and the fact that it's not just the technology, but there's a substantial organizational change behind that to drive use and adoption and productive use of it. We're also finding that even if the decision is made within IT, for example, or HR to move ahead with the strategy, if the organization's not ready, we're finding that security is absolutely critical. We've got to be sure that that adoption of the cloud capabilities, exchanging information on this single pane of glass digital workplace experience is done in a secure manner. So security becomes very important. And then also, what is the right approach from a technical perspective? What is the right sequence of activities such that I am not creating too much of a disjunct experience for my employees? So for example, if I'm a Microsoft customer and I already have Exchange Online, fantastic. I've already got the basics in place, and maybe Azure Active Directory. So maybe I'm able to now further deploy things like Teams and SharePoint as a basis for an intranet. But if I don't have that in place, for example, I don't have Exchange Online, there are things to be aware of that could create a disjunct experience for the employee and ultimately really drive down that employee experience. And I think the other thing that's interesting too is that when we think about whether it's from the bottom up or the top down or some mix and match this is a business transformation, right? So back to that diagram we had, so much of this change and so much of this strategy impacts the employees, right? They have to do their job, but considering the impact to other parts of the business, the partners, fulfillment, certainly customers and the like, but it's truly a migration or a strategy to move to digital first.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And I think we see this a lot with our customers as well, where so much of what they're trying to do isn't about technology. It's about how are they going to embrace their larger organization, and even how are they going to embrace certain parts of their organization. And we'll get into some of those examples when we get into the end of the presentation today. But really, kind of just thinking about your different audiences internally, and how you use things like maybe content personalization or things like that to be able to apply your strategy via technology. And so we'll certainly get into that in the technology section. Before we do that, we want to talk a little bit about culture, because none of the strategy and none of the technology is going to mean much if you don't have a strong corporate culture, especially in these days where you may not have the ability to bring, especially new hires, into a common area for people to meet with them and kind of bring them into the family and do things like that. And so you've got to have kind of strong grounding there. And I know you can't see it very well just because of the way that we've got this structured, but this is literally a sign in our office as you walk into the building that talks about our corporate culture here at Acumatica. And so, kind of our notion is that people should be able to love the way they work. And for us, that's going to mean different things than it means for other people, right? We're a software company. So some of the things are like build it right? We have to make sure we're focusing on quality delivery of our software. But other things are going to be about how we work well together, right? People should have a sense of purpose. People should be able to have good common discourse. One of our core values is vet the opinion, but respect the decision. People aren't always going to agree on everything together, but a strong team has the ability to have good open debate and then try to find a common core for the organization moving forward. That's one of our core values. And certainly there's others here, like empowering others, being bold, having a sense of purpose. That's kind of what grounds us and how we try to instill our values with our employees. But that's, I think, even more important than things like strategy and technology, right? You have to have kind of that grounding element for who you are as an organization. And I'll pass it to Aaron to talk about their core values.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree, Troy, completely with the core values are critical for culture. In fact, it's interesting. I've been at Centric now a little over 14 years, and I know that so often core values and culture are things that people talk a lot about, but until you actually see them really tangibly exercised or tangibly represented, you don't really think that they're real. And I will say that one of the hallmarks of our company, and again, things that we're asked about now through COVID, is how do you actually do virtual, and how have you been able to do virtual for so long, and how have you been able to have such an incredibly low retention or attrition, pardon me, and high retention in the organization? And it's largely due to that we kind of eat and breathe and sleep our culture. And I wanted to touch on two just briefly here. If we think about our core values, culture is actually one of those. We feel like, we have something that it's an intangible, and it's very, very, very easy to lose. But once people understand it, and once they see it being played out, it's incredibly powerful, and it helps people really invest in and be connected with the organization. We believe as well that at the center of all this is the fact that we have a balanced life, right? That our work-life balance is important to us. We're consultants. A lot of us have come from, big five consulting organizations. You're traveling all the time. We really wanted to create a company where we could do things that allowed us to be part of our kids' soccer teams and baseball, and still also deliver to clients in an impactful and meaningful way. And then I think the last thing that's actually popped up that I wanted to highlight for today, at least, is this idea of innovation. We were actually recently, we won an award through Wired Magazine, recognizing us as a leader in innovation. And it's interesting to see this kind of come up through the ranks in our consulting organization and the value of it for us. But for a company that is looking at really embracing a virtual culture, how do you celebrate that? How do you actually promote and develop ideas? And we've been able to do that, and we've been able to really rally some very disparate ideas and voices. We do that every year through what's called Camp IO. We have people bring ideas and present, and then ultimately vote on and seek to win some prize. But at the end of the day, for us, among these other core values, innovation is a big deal. And for organizations that are dealing with a fully virtual environment for the first time ever, how do they do innovation? How is that actually done through, and what is the strategy to sort of promote that? And again, we're getting asked about that question quite a bit. So we wanted to share those two areas with at least with this audience. And I think the next slide, there's an example of one of the things that we do, and I'll kind of talk about this briefly. We the idea of having a water cooler conversation, that's kind of it's a bit of a cliche anymore, but the reality is that conversations happen in the hallways, right, at lunch, as you're walking around doing your job, and then at the water cooler historically, right? How do you actually do that in a fully virtual environment? Like, what does that look like? And one of the things that we've been able to do is actually create that experience within our own organization, but we've kind of put some guardrails in place, if you will. The first thing I think that's really important is we want to be able to connect with others and do it in a non sort of forced way. So we want to create a space at the beginning of our meetings, and we try to do this as much as we can, where we just spend some time catching up. How are things going? Anything that's new and interesting. People, will share if they know the group well. What do we do this weekend? How are my kids doing? What are we involved in? That kind of thing. And over time, what we found is that if you can allocate just a couple minutes at the top of a call and do that kind of sort of water cooler conversation, it helps really build and then and grow trust with others in the organization. We've had a couple instances over the years where people have really gotten to know each other very well over the course of virtual audio conversations, and then for the first time when they meet, they have this sort of virtual reunion because they've actually never met each other, but they've built that relationship and that high level of trust just by virtue of opening up a bit. And so I think the key point here for us, and again, what we've realized and are sharing with our clients is, you know what, you don't have to actually see someone. Certainly video is awesome, right? But you don't actually have to see and be present with someone to be able to foster a relationship. You can actually do that and do that pretty well if you just create some guardrails around things as simple as a meeting and ensuring that you have some time and space to connect with others before you get right into the business of the meeting itself. So Troy, I know you were going to mention a little bit about Akuma's culture as well.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Aaron just said, and that's literally something that we do on our team meetings, right? So we carve out 10 minutes in front of an hour-long meeting where people can share what's going on in their lives, right? And so, for example, I've shared a couple pictures here. This is from a camping trip that my family took back in July, and this is something I share in a team meeting. We talk about, this is it's a camping spot in New Hampshire here called Jericho Mountain. They've got a beautiful lake and waterfall and hiking trails, and we just share for a few minutes, what's going on in our lives or what we did recently. And to Aaron's point, it does help foster that connectivity, right? We were understanding what else people are doing in their lives besides just the work that we're all working on together. And it does build a stronger team. But I think the important thing to note is it has to be purposeful, right? It's not, hey, we're just chit-chatting for the first 5 to 10 minutes of a call. We're really trying to share something meaningful so that people can get to know us better. Because even before today, in this year, a lot of our workers were remote, right? We've got people in different regions. I myself personally, before March of this year, spent a lot of time on the road. I was on planes and in other cities and not sitting in the office with people, but I still needed to connect with them. I still needed to be able to be part of the team. And doing things like this in a purposeful manner really allows you to do that. And again, it's just part of extending that culture as a team and just making sure you make time for it. Otherwise, you can just get lost in kind of the repetitive nature of business and not have those personal connections. And I think the next one is going into and talking about embracing remote work to amplify your corporate culture. And I think we talked a little bit about that, but Aaron, why don't you pick up on this one and I'll kind of weigh in with our thoughts as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Troy. So, It's the idea here that many of these things may already be happening in the organization prior to COVID. Many of these things, in fact, now that we've come through the summer, people are starting to really figure out and have actually implemented. And so we're kind of in this phase of, okay, now we need to embrace this remote work or this business anywhere. And what else do we need to do to kind of amplify our culture? How do we actually do that? And as we've said, we're getting asked this question quite a bit. I would say there's quite a bit of detail here, but for the time that we have, just two kind of key points I drive to the conversation. I think first off, the very most important thing, and back to our employee experience, is this ability to amplify your culture in the remote world is starting with trust with your people, ensuring that they feel like they can be trusted with, you can trust them with their work remotely, and that that they're doing their job, that they're effectively doing their job. And then if there are issues or challenges, of course, management will be there to assist. But we're often asked about, well, how do I know? How do I measure? How do I track? And so we're actually making recommendations to some of our clients to not implement some of those productivity tools that are actually looking at exactly what people are doing, because that actually erodes trust, and that's really hard to get back. So first bullet point there, start with trust. The other thing I think, and they're kind of coupled together, those second two, is there are things there are ways of working that are different in a remote experience for both the employee as well as the team leader or leadership. And we're finding that people may very well understand how to do their job, but they may need some additional training or may need some additional guardrails or coaching on what are these remote worker skills that are necessary. What's the protocol for a Teams meeting? Like, is video okay or not? Should I always do it or not? How do I actually not overwork? We've actually seen in Harvard Business Review published an article back in July around the average workday is increasing for people who work from home by about 48 to 58 minutes because there are the boundaries that are necessary between your work and your life. And in your fully remote work, sometimes those boundaries get a little blurry. So ensuring that people understand how to create a necessary space to do that. And then for leadership perspective, people may not necessarily know how to lead and manage and foster their team in a remote model. So for example, how do you provide feedback? How do you coach? How do you do reviews? How do you shadow and do other things that are important for people's personal development? And so it really is important to understand that there may very well be an investment that you make both in your employees as well as your leadership to ensure that they have the right skills for working in this environment. And then the last bullet point here in this people part is that when you recruit, it may very well be that you're looking at people who are a great fit, but you got to make sure that this virtual model you're recruiting for the cultural fit as well. And can your new staff coming into the organization, can they really assess who you are as an organization, and can you really assess them for culture fit? Ensure that you have the right sort of guardrails in place for that to happen. The second thing I'd say, and again, there are many of these, but just the two main ones, is when we think about amplifying corporate culture as well, or company culture in this remote work, is how do we operate? Like, what is it? What are some of the really key parts of this? How do we operate in this space? And the natural one here goes to virtual meetings, whether it was Zoom or GoToMeeting or Cisco's products or Teams, whatever it may be. We all know that the virtual meeting is very different than face-to-face, but it doesn't mean that face-to-face goes away entirely. And so as an organization, we've learned, again, we can't do that now. We've had to make some changes, but virtual meetings are awesome, but it doesn't mean that we never have face-to-face meetings. So once we're allowed to get back together, we plan to, and we make that same recommendation to our clients that, hey, this period of time, we get it, you can't actually do that, but we don't, if you're gonna go to fully working remotely, don't back away from having investment in face-to-face time, because that's important too. So find a balance. Find a way to ask your employees how you're doing. Make that an open and very transparent process so people feel like they can provide feedback. We actually do a yearly employee survey and have found over the years that that's extremely helpful to really understand how we're doing as a company. And then I think the last thing that's critical, and there are a couple additional points here we wanted to make around technology, but that technology can absolutely amplify your culture, can absolutely provide value to remote work, but it's likely that you'll need to make some investments. Last point and here is that as a company, we actually were pretty excited about operating with pretty simple tools for a long time. And a couple of years ago, we decided that we needed to make some investments to really get ready for our next major growth spurt. And boy, that was a great decision because having a common platform for us to be able to exchange information, to collaborate, to communicate has helped us both connect with each other, but also further do our work in a more productive fashion in a way that we are still seeing the benefits from. So that is a key part of this, that although technology is often a piece of this, we would argue that it's an area that will absolutely amplify your remote work protocols, but it's likely going to mean you're going to need to reinvest either in the tools or in the security around those tools, or more importantly, the adoption and training that's needed to really make the best use of those tools. So Troy, anything you'd add to this? Any other thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, and just looking at the time, there's actually, and one of the things we struggled with building this presentation is there's a ton we want to share. So I'll just pick up on one point just because I could talk about 3 or 4 of these bullets. And it's Aaron's last point is that as a technology company, we had kind of the opposite experience. When we first started, we invested heavily in tech because that's what we do. And so we had all the tools and all the techniques and all the people that understood those technologies to do all these remote meetings, everything we might need to do, right? We had all of the shared services in Office 365 and all those capabilities, and we used them very well. One thing that's changed for us over time is that we realized that the thing that we weren't doing very well is we were kind of traditional early on in our hiring, where we would hire people that are near us and could work in the building with us and could be, a part of the kind of family in terms of being face to face. Over and even before this year, but certainly more this year than most, we've realized that, hey, we don't have to do that. We can hire the right people, right? We might find the right candidates that maybe they happen to live in Kansas City, Missouri, but they're the right fit for our team. We already have the tools in place to make them part of the family, just do it more remotely, right? Have them when we can, to Aaron's point, but have them in the office and have them travel here and do group meetings when we can, or make sure we can meet in remote locations when we can. But we didn't always do that. And I think over the last couple of years, we've really embraced the fact that let's hire for the right culture and the right people. We've already got the technology in place that can help us bring people together. And so I think it's an important point to make is that you might be on one side of that spectrum or another, and both are critical, right? You want to hire for your culture and the right people, not necessarily have them be with you all the time. But you do need that technology in place, whether you have it now or you need to invest in it. Those are both important points. And on that note, we'll get into kind of the process and technology side of things, and then wrap it up with some examples. So Aaron, do you want to maybe take first stab at this, and I'll weigh in?
Yeah, and I'm going to go through both of these slides rather quickly because I know we had some other content here as well. But I think we've mentioned this a couple times that when we think about getting to a remote experience and really amplifying culture, it's more than just technology. Technology plays a big part of it. We believe that there are many parts to that, and this diagram, certainly looking at people, process, information, and technology becomes really important. So it's a holistic approach, and I guess that's the significance here is it's taken together, understanding that the technology is important. However, people and training them, people and hiring, the processes around fulfillment, processes around onboarding, and certainly all the information that is delivered to organizations, different divisions within the organization, all become sort of knitted together. And creating that one-stop shop, a single experience, really amplifies people's productivity in the organization and ultimately helps drive that employee engagement.
Excellent. I'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we were hoping to convey here too is the idea that there is a tremendously large toolbox in which many tools exist, and which ones do I use? So when we think about the experience for working from anywhere, and how do employees start to become productive, we have seen quite a bit of consolidation down to a single set of tools, whether that's an Office 365 and really leveraging the workloads that are available, or creating some pretty clear guidelines around which tools to use and when. So if Teams hasn't been fully deployed, when is Zoom appropriate? If not, or GoToMeeting, and things of this sort. So really understanding that the employee experience kind of falls down around or is built is structured around, you know, the productivity tools, document creation, document collaboration, the ability to manage effectively Office products. How do I actually deliver important information to my employees that's personalized? How do I ensure that information is secure and secured in a way that doesn't preclude what I have to do to share? And then last but not least, what is it that I have to do in the organization to really drive the change that's necessary for people to use the tools? And then how do I ensure that people actually are, and measuring that through adoption? So the idea that we're embracing both the process and technology really support working from anywhere, but it's a conscious decision. Which are the tools? How are they supposed to be used in the organization? How do I create a single experience for that employee? And then ultimately, how do I help drive that change across the organization and measure its adoption through some tools, through some metrics and the like?
Yeah, and the thing I'd add to that is that, again, to Aaron's point, some of these things are their tools themselves, right? You know, how do I leverage something like a Slack or a Teams or something like that to actual foster collaboration? And others are the techniques themselves, in terms of, if I want to create that maybe single view for somebody, or I want to create a more personalized interface for an employee, you've actually got to take a step back and understand who your employees are, right? And so, for example, we work with a large hydro energy provider in Western Canada, and a lot of their workforce are actually union contractors. They don't work for the company necessarily, right? And they've all got different things that they need to do for that company, and frankly, rules around the content and things like that they can see. So our software would allow them to create an experience that's tailored to each one of those people, but without sitting down with them and understanding what those personas look like and who those people are and the information they need, the technology can't really help them. So a lot of it is about that process. It's about understanding who your workforce is, what you need to provide them with, what regulations might exist, if there are any, about how you provide data, and then taking those attributes and then using technology to facilitate that. So technology itself isn't a solution to all problems. It certainly can be a great facilitator, but you've really got to look kind of at what your unique scenarios are in order to apply it correctly. And that kind of goes into the next slide here, where we're taking a look at kind of one holistic set of tools. But I think, you know, if you look across these, and Aaron's going to go into them a bit more, you could find, you know, equivalents across many different types of platforms, right? Whether you're talking about people living in Google, or they're living in, you know, IBM suites, or things like Slack and others. There's a lot of these different types of tools out there, and how you use them can really affect how you engage your employees. And so, Aaron, I'll let you talk a little bit about this, and then we'll get into some examples.
Sure, thanks, Troy. So I think there are many graphics that attempt to provide this story, but this one I think does a good job of really describing, again, that overlay of where work gets done, or in the case of, you know, what tools to use. And I think the interesting component here is, in a fully remote workforce, some of these aspects of the inner and outer core. So the idea that I'm working with my department, my employees, my team, or I'm working with a project team in a fully remote environment, that may be very new. That may be something that hadn't yet existed, because the proximity and the ability for us to come into an office actually solved that. So thinking about things that I do as an individual at the core, what are my tools? How do I manage my information? And then how do I start to work out from that? And what tools help me do things like share and collaborate and work with others, the them, if you will, my stuff, our stuff, and their stuff. We think about things like the Office products, Outlook being a prominent communication tool. We all use email, certainly OneDrive for my own files to share, OneNote for my own notes and the like. But as we start to get in those more collaborative rings, if you will, working out from my internal work into teaming, we start looking at things like Teams and SharePoint and others. And to Troy's point, we see quite a bit of organizations where they may actually have Box, or they may have Google Drive, or they may have other tools. How do those kind of fit together? Well, again, we think it's important to really think about that core inner outer loop as a means of, how do I do my job? How do I work with others? And then finally, how do I work with perhaps others that are outside of my organization in a fully remote work environment? So hopefully this is helpful. This diagram is helpful in terms of some of the structure there and how people do work.
Awesome, and I'll get into some examples now, because I think it's important to look at how people have kind of implemented these things. So if we take a look at a few of them really quickly, this is an organization called Banner Health. They're a healthcare provider, hospital system out in Phoenix, Arizona. They actually have many, many offices. They wanted to provide, more of a traditional intranet experience, certainly, but they also wanted to provide kind of highly personalized information based on where somebody might be working, right? They've got dozens of facilities. They've got, tens of thousands of employees that work across those facilities. And so they provide this mobile enabled and desktop enabled interface that allows me to have access to content, tools, information, communities that I might have access to, even allow me to go in and filter things based on, maybe I'm working at one provider today, but next week I'm going to be working at another to fill in. And I want to be able to filter information based on that, right? Because I may not be familiar with that hospital. I may need to know things that are going on there. And on top of that, they also wanted to be able to provide the ability for people to know one another. And so they use our software to be able to go and allow people to have these kind of virtual profiles where I can get to know people. Again, maybe I'm going to work in another facility and I want to look at the people that are going to be on that floor with me, helping provide care to our to their patients. And so this gives them the ability to go in and understand who the people are in their organization, specifically those that they may not be working with, and get to know more about them and be able to connect to them. Another example would be a customer of ours called Church's Chicken. And if you're not familiar with them, they are the world's third largest provider of quick service retail in kind of the chicken industry, right? So you've got KFC, you've got Popeyes, you've got Church's. They've got over 2,000 locations across the globe. Everything they do is remote, if you think about it, right? Because most of their employees are remote and they're working in stores. And so even before what's happened this year had occurred, they used what they call team churches as a mechanism to allow them to communicate effectively to all their employees. So whether you're in corporate, whether you're a franchise owner, whether you work in a franchise, and whether you're in a different market, you get a different experience when you log in. So if I'm in the Middle East and I log in and I'm in a franchise, I'm going to see content and information that's just for me in the Middle East, right? I'm not going to see promotions that are happening in Asia Pac or here in the US. I'm just going to see content for me. And on top of that, they've got a full collaboration engine where people can go in and post things like, hey, here's a new image of, we set up this promotion. Here's what it looks like. Here's our new store that we just launched. Here's a process that we're using, or, hey, I've got a question. And people can actually comment on content. They can collaborate together in that environment. And the cool thing is, even during this year, during what's been going on, they've been able to open up about a dozen stores across the globe during 2020. And team churches is a big part of them being able to do that, because new stores can go in and see information. They can see how-to videos. They can get information about what's going on in their market, even if they're a brand new store. And so it's been a great tool for them to be able to connect with their employees, even again, down to those store workers, which wasn't something they were traditionally doing before. And so that's one of the examples I wanted to bring up. And another couple of quick examples is, if I go in here real quick, we just click on this image and bring it up. One of the things we're providing is this concept of kind of this scrolling activity stream, this ability for you to have content that is being fed to you from multiple different sources, allowing you to use technology to do your job better, right? Because not everything is going to be kind of traditional corporate intranet content. It could be, I've got an approval coming from a back office system, or I've got a chat coming from somebody, or somebody wants to provide me with recognition, or I want to react to something. Think in terms of using a tool like LinkedIn, but for the corporate world. This is something that our technology can help people provide. And then the other thing I'll mention just really quickly is we can also, again, help people leverage their investment in other tools and still bring in different types of content. So this is an example of our software being surfaced as an app inside of Microsoft Teams, which is a great collaboration tool, but it's not necessarily made to share maybe traditional intranet type experiences. We can actually bring that type of content into that collaboration environment. And that really allows people to have one place to go to get everything that they need. Whether it, again, happens to be corporate content or access to an external system, or if they want to jump into a session like this or into a team and collaborate on something, they can do so through one pane. And so technology can be a great enabler for these things, but again, it is all about using the strategies appropriately, understanding your culture, and applying those things. That's really what sets a successful deployment apart from others that aren't maybe so successful. And so I'll go ahead and get out of this screen share, and we can go into kind of wrap up in some questions. So we've been recording this webinar. We will send it out to everybody within 24 hours. Again, we can make the slides available. And just to reiterate, if you want to know more about Acumatica, you can follow us either on LinkedIn or check out our website. If you want to know more about Centric, they're prominent on both Twitter and LinkedIn at the following hashtags. And so, again, we'll share these slides so you can have that information. We did want to get into a little bit of Q&A. Just given the time, we probably won't be able to get to all questions, but why don't I go ahead and read a few that have come in, and then we'll make sure that we follow up on any additional questions that have been submitted. So Aaron, I'll do this. I'll read the questions, and then maybe if you want to provide the first response, and then I'll tag in so we can wrap things up.
Yep, sounds good.
I would say, let me look at this. So one of the questions was, how do you balance collaboration with corporate intranet content?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, Gartner actually published and has published over the last couple of years some good material on what a digital workplace is. And what I mean by that is that digital workplace has shifted from self-service, sort of going and retrieving just forms and sort of picking and choosing things off the internet to a single experience, meaning that I do collaboration, I get to external sites and other back-end systems directly through the intranet or digital workplace, excuse me. And so the idea of collaboration, the idea that I'm actually creating content, I'm sharing it, I'm co-authoring through the Office products. I may actually have an impromptu meeting. All of these things really are surfaced through or are accessed through this digital workplace. And so we're seeing more and more of those two kind of converge. And I'll use Teams as a good example of that. Microsoft continues to kind of drive to that single pane of glass with Teams as a go-to for all things collaborative and communication specific. They've created a way for you to embed both a digital workplace experience like Acumatica inside of one of the tabs. And then as you're seeing with Acumatica as a digital workplace solution, the same being for content coming out of Teams. So I tend to think about collaboration as a function of what you do or access through the intranet or through the digital workplace. And the idea that the digital workplace is that single access point for all work and the ability to find and exchange and then collaborate with folks is really through the tools themselves that are accessed through the digital workplace.
Yeah, and just real quickly, I definitely agree there. I mean, these tools are complementary to one another, and because you actually can share across them. I've been in meetings where I'm in a sharing session in something like Teams, or we're in a team meeting, and right within the interface, I can actually go and grab an article or piece of content from our intranet and share it with the team, so they can actually see it, right? And I don't have to switch context. I don't have to go from one tool to another. So you can use them collaboratively, but they are for different purposes, right? There's kind of authoritative knowledge and content that maybe your intranet or digital workplace holds. And then there's really that collaborative information that you're working on together. And again, they may bleed one into another, right? I may be working on, let's say it's a new, data sheet for our product, and I'm working with our marketing team and our product team, and we're creating something together in that collaboration tool. But once it's ready, I'm going to want to promote that to everybody who might be outside of that team, that I might want to see this content we've created. And a natural place to promote that would be into that digital workplace. So those tools definitely are very complementary to one another. Another question was, what advice would you give to companies that are seeing a demand for more remote work? So maybe those that haven't traditionally been heavily remote workforces and now need to shift there or thinking about shifting there. Kind of what advice would you give people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would want to create an understanding, a strategy around what that group will be doing and the purpose for their work, whether it's to support a better balance of work and life, whether it's because the facility that they have is not fully open. But if it's not a fully organization-wide sort of work from anywhere model, and it's a department or division specific, then really understanding the strategy behind why it is they're going to be doing this. And then also on the technical side of things, thinking about the logistics for that. So is it necessary to maybe have a stress test for their processes and the information they need to do their job? If it's a call center group, with the call center itself, for example, the software actually work in this distributed model. And then, even further down the road is when people are remote and they are working from home, some guidance in terms of how that sort of work pod at home will look. Do they have sufficient bandwidth, for example? Do they need to come in through a VPN? Is the VPN ready? Is the information that they need to actually do their job available through that sort of public channel? So it kind of starts with the why and what they're trying to accomplish if it's not an organization-wide, and then really working out those areas we talked about earlier, the people side. Are people ready? Do they have the right structures in place, processes and information, and then the technology to support that? So those would be some recommendations.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would probably echo those thoughts, and it kind of leads into, I think, what will be our last question for today is, can you provide different experience for different types of employees? And just echoing off what Aaron's saying is, sure, and you need to analyze what those different employees might need, right? Aaron mentioned call center folks. Maybe you've got manufacturing floor employees that some of them can come on shift. We've got some customers that live in that world where they've had to go in and divide their shifts, right? They've got an A, B, and C shift now, where because of social distancing, they need to have a reduced number of people in those facilities. Well, how do they provide the remote experience for them when they're not on shift, right? Giving them access to content and information they might need when they're going to go on shift. And then how do they provide remote information to those folks that may be more administrative workers who aren't going to come into the building because they don't need to be there, right? And they can lessen the load of the amount of people in the building by having those people work remote full time. And so it's really about, I think, balancing kind of the different types of workers you have as well. I mean, in some cases, while your workers might be remote, so churches, for example, those are remote workers in the sense that they're not in a corporate office, but they're not sitting at home either, right? They're in their stores, they're serving their customers, but that's a different profile than, hey, I'm a remote worker now because I'm a knowledge worker and I am at home now full time because I don't necessarily need to be in the building. So I think you can provide those different experiences. You just need to understand what those different personas are and how you're going to address them. And Aaron, I don't know if you have something to add to that as well, but that's kind of how we look at things.
Yeah, I would echo everything you said. I think a key phrase that we've realized and we heard early in this process is working from home was a bit of the moniker given, right, in the March-April timeframe. Hashtag WFH, right, and work from home. But in reality, it's at home working. It could be at Starbucks. It could be at, as you've said, a facility. But the idea of business anywhere, you need to conduct your business anywhere, is really where this trend we believe is moving. And the idea of supporting your employees and what they need to do their job and how they need to collaborate with others. How do we do that successfully? Really anywhere, business anywhere.
Excellent. Yeah, and we see that as well. So, one thing, as we wrap up, I'll mention again is, we're going to make this content available for folks. So you have the ability to view the presentation again. You'll have the contact information to certainly reach out to Centric or Acumatica via our social channels. And certainly we can follow up as well and answer any of the questions we didn't get to today. because there certainly were a lot of questions that we just didn't have time for. But I do want to thank everybody for joining, and certainly, hopefully, you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.